Well, hello, good morning or good afternoon, whatever time and whichever country you're joining us today for Diversity Network's webinar on strategies for a multi-generational workforce. I'm delighted to introduce our solo speaker, who is Michael O'Reilly, founder of the Age Diversity Network. More than 1 million people in the UK have retired early between the age of 50 and 64. Mike O'Reilly, in his 50s, founded the Age Diversity Network when he repeatedly got down to the last 2 candidates, but was not offered a job. And this happened to him 10 times. At the same time, we know there's a significant skill shortage in the UK, in the workplace and beyond. And it's Mike's mission now to work with organisations to stop the stigma of employing older workers and help employers see the value in experienced employees. Most recently, he is part of the lobby for the House of Commons for an Older People's Commissioner in England and Scotland. In Northern Ireland and Wales, there has been one for more than 10 years supporting the rights of older people in the workplace and into retirement. Welcome, Michael.
Hi, I'm pleased to be here. Thank you for inviting me. As Elisabeth already said, my name is Michael O'Reilly. I am the founder of the Age Diversity Network. And we specialise in age diversity in the workplace by working with organisations that are looking to implement change. And we also offer individual support to those suffering from it. So why am I presenting on this topic? Well, over the years, I have personally suffered from ageism and have seen firsthand the impact this can have on individuals, and more importantly, how and why this seems to occur. But by working in a number of age-inclusive environments during that period, and by seeing how it is addressed positively, the huge differences this can make not only to the workforce, but just as importantly to the organisation. I have seen the difference this can make to the working environment and how this transforms into a much happier workforce and trust in the employer. So the first topic here is why it needs to be addressed and why is it important to embrace and implement? Well, essentially, when we talk about ageism, we must not forget and need to keep reminding ourselves that it relates to younger, middle-aged and older people. Not only is it illegal, it is also morally wrong, and it's our duty to tackle this and do everything we can to address it and to understand the different requirements and needs of those different demographics. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect and to be afforded the same opportunities as others, regardless of their age. And it's down to us to create that environment where all ages feel welcome, included, and valued. So through the creation of an age-diverse workplace, what we are doing is empowering ourselves to address ageism head-on and to embrace the wide range of a true diverse set of perspectives and experience into the workplace. So why does it make a difference to an organisation? Well, it's pretty obvious to a degree, but what we're talking about is the benefits that are derived from an all-age workforce can have a profound impact in many aspects of an organisation. If we consider the various ingredients that make up the very being of the different Asians within a workplace, what skills they bring, what experience they possess, and what knowledge they have, this will give us a much better understanding of the range of perspectives and insights we can tap into and utilize. This in turn undoubtedly converts into increased creativity along with a broader range of skills and experience. And it is vital that organizations create a supportive work environment that values this diversity and actively promotes collaboration among employees of different ages. If you do, then your workplace and the employees will benefit hugely from those different perspectives and approach and be less likely to be looking for another employer. We also need to understand that a diverse age range in the workforce creates opportunities for cross-generational learning, which in turn allows employees to learn new ways of working, gain new skills and knowledge, support each other along that journey, which as a result will naturally create an inclusive working environment. And by adopting this attitude and approach that recognises and supports workers of every age, you're also creating an environment that works better as a workforce that feels valued, and hopefully somewhere along the line they relish going to work every day working for you. So what a better way to put yourselves in the position of being an employer that cares about their staff, does the right thing, and puts you in the category of an employer of choice for those seeking work. To look at how this plays out in the real world, there have been many studies carried out to see how an intergenerational workforce that has the support and well-being of the employees as a key factor in something they stand by, not only improves the health and well-being of the workforce, but it also increases productivity, innovation, and profits. So some of these companies include the likes of SAP. Now, SAP, they had devised an intergenerational mentoring program, which they have admitted led to increased employee engagement and retention, as well as improving innovation and customer satisfaction. Another example is McDonald's, who we all know quite well. They created a program called McDonald's Voices. This one was specifically designed to encourage employees of various ages, to share their thoughts and engage through feedback. Their report showed that the initiative had resulted in enhanced customer service, increased sales, and has been acknowledged by them for contributing to the company's expansion. And finally, the last example is we go to PwC. PwC had recognized quite early on the advantages of having an age-diverse workforce and established numerous initiatives such as mentoring and coaching programs that match employees from different age groups. And as a result, they have acknowledged this has enhanced creativity, attracted valuable employees, and has resulted in an improvement in retaining those employees, and just as importantly for them, has had a direct positive impact on their financial results. So there's 3 organizations we all know there, 3 organizations that have implemented something across all ages, and 3 organizations that have reported positive results. So we know for a fact that within organizations that recognize and implement an age-inclusive working environment, they all learn from each other. They want to learn, they support each other, and they respect each other's input and value they bring to the team's dynamics. Whilst we know the pandemic, unfortunately, has increased the number of vacancies worldwide, all of those companies I mentioned have recognized the importance of an age-diverse workforce well before the pandemic even hit. So they are pretty well placed to reap the benefits of an already well-established model. So, what are the typical barriers and challenges to overcome and achieve a blended workforce? Well, it does have its challenges, and it is not as straightforward as we would like to think. And there are many barriers to overcome and changes to make in order to implement a successful working model. Like most things, there is no one size fits all in terms of solutions, and addressing the needs of a diverse range of ages does present its own challenges in what we offer and how we do that. Historically, we have created plenty of opportunities for the younger workforce entering the workplace, managing their career path and carefully nurturing them towards a successful career. And traditionally, as we all know, this is through offering internships, apprenticeships, graduate programs, training programs to develop their skills and knowledge, rotational programs to gain exposure to different areas of the company, leadership programs, fast track management programs. I could go on and on and on, but suffice to say, there's lots of different programs for people entering the workforce and how their career can be managed going forward. But as we know, we are facing an increase in life expectancy, which is leading to a growing necessity to address the needs of our aging population who wish to work for longer periods of time, often out of financial necessity and to ensure stability in their retirement. The increase in retirement ages also plays into this ever-growing need to address how we must adapt to ensure we are able to provide what is needed to create a working environment that gives the level of support and opportunities that have now been extended into our later lives. So with retirement age is also on the rise, it's imperative that we consider how to adapt and provide the necessary support and opportunities for individuals to continue working in their later years. Understanding what changes and support processes you will need to consider for older workers and how that plays into your existing and future working model is likely to be one of your biggest challenges. We certainly don't need to change what is currently being provided for our younger workforce, as they are our future, and we need to consider carefully any changes we make does not impact them. But we do need to see how we can adapt our approach to some of these provisions to our older workforce, considering they are likely to be in the workplace for longer. Different generations will often have different priorities, different skill sets, different goals, and different thoughts about their work-life balance. And it's not about one way is right, one way is wrong. It's about recognizing these different needs and how we provide for them. If we do not recognize we have an issue in how our current workforce work together and what we provide in terms of support and how, then that's a problem in itself. However, if we are at the stage where we know we need to do something about it, often we will struggle with how to go about approaching it, as there are so many different aspects we need to look at, so many different things we need to offer or change, and so many things that might create issues in other areas, if not thought through thoroughly. You will need to get strong support from the top, as often it's not necessarily seen as something that requires you to do any more than is necessary than to comply with your legal obligations. You will need buy-in from senior management, in other words, the ones with the purse strings, as it will cost you resources and it will cost you money, no doubt. Without their support, it's likely not to go very far. And resistance to change is always a difficult challenge to overcome in any organization. So hopefully by carrying out a comprehensive review, you will often be able to put together a fairly decent proposal with an action plan, and most importantly, along with the derived benefits. That just may get you at the very least a budget for a pilot, if not the whole thing. You'll need the skills and knowledge of what needs to be done, how it needs to be done, how to get there, how long it will take, and a solid picture of the end result. You could even provide a roadmap, if that's something you're capable of doing or want to do, of what it takes and how to get there. Setting the goals can only be achieved if you understand what those goals are. So when I talk about the older workers, part of the challenges that we face are how to apply for roles, how they're treated internally, and why it's important to look closely at this particular demographic. As you can see on the slide, there have been a number of studies carried out, and I've picked out a few that I'm aware of that shows the thoughts of employers when it comes to hiring older workers and the behaviour towards them. So the first one is the Society for Human Resource Management, which I'm sure many of you are aware of. They reported that 61% of employers would consider applicants over the age of 50, but unfortunately only 19% actively recruited people of this age. The WHO organization, on the other hand, is nothing to do about recruitment, but this is more about ageist attitudes, who reported that 1 in 2 people globally admitted ageist behavior to others. And this was specifically targeted at older people, this report. And finally, the CMI reported that only 4 out of 10 managers would be open to hiring workers over 50. So we can see that there are a few issues there that need to be considered when looking at how we address this. So another few stats worth throwing out there is that over the next 30 years, so by 2050 rather, globally, the over 65s are predicted to double in number. That's in the next 30 years. That's quite scary in a way. And by that stat alone, it shows a greater need for work provisions of this age group. And more importantly, part of that report was that within the same time frame, the prediction is that the over 65s in the next 30 years will outnumber the under 25s. So there's going to be a bit of a competition between the younger workers coming into the workforce and the older workers who are outnumbering those younger workers. We recently also did our own survey, which we published in April 2023, with a cross-section of older workers aged between 50 and 70. And out of those, a whopping 91% said they were looking for work. Now, although 45% of those that took part in the survey were already in work, the reasons for them wanting to leave and are looking for new jobs is that the current organization they were working for did very little to support the needs of older workers and were looking to change employer. So in addition to the lack of support provided by employers, older workers also suffer from ageist attitudes based on assumptions during the hiring process. Now, these assumptions are often regarded as myths, but the examples that I would quote are technological changes. So effectively, as technology advances, older workers may struggle to keep up with the latest developments, may find it challenging to learn new systems and software. That's one assumption. Another assumption is on physical limitations. Older workers may experience physical limitations that make it harder for them to perform certain tasks, especially those that require a lot of standing, lifting, or manual labor. That leads into health issues, another assumption that all older workers are more likely to have health issues that can impact their ability to work, such as chronic illnesses, vision or hearing loss, or mobility problems. Also, career stagnation. Older workers are often assumed that they may feel stuck in their careers, have done everything they want to do, and now they are faced with fewer opportunities for advancement or professional development. And retirement pressure is one of the ones when older workers are coming to the end of their working life. Some employers may pressure older workers to retire or may offer early retirement packages that may be tempting, but in essence, it could also leave the worker with less income and less security in the long term. And finally, the other assumption is intergenerational conflicts. Now, there is an assumption out there that older workers may struggle to work with younger workers, and they have different work styles, values, and attitudes towards work. I've worked in these environments myself, and I can say that is an absolute myth. Like any walk in life, you will get the odd one where there will be a problem, but generally speaking, most older workers love working with the younger workforce and vice versa. So all of these challenges may apply to some, but not all of them. And this is exactly where an employer can adapt and change to provide the support needed, but more importantly, to not lose out on the skills and knowledge that has been gained over many years, and to capitalize on this by hiring and retaining such valuable resources. So what sort of challenges are you likely to face? Well, one of the things in terms of trying to implement this type of approach internally, as it says on the slide, it should not be ignored, but there are a lot of different aspects to consider when undertaking this. So if you look at things like work-life balance requirements as the first bullet point, different generations have different priorities when it comes to work-life balance. Older workers may prioritize stability and job security, while younger workers may prioritize flexibility and work-life integration. And companies may need to offer flexible work arrangements to meet the diverse needs of their workforce, young and old. The next bullet point is leadership and management styles. Well, different generations again may have different expectations of leadership styles. For example, an older worker may prefer a more authoritative leadership style, so they know exactly what's expected from them, exactly what they need to do, and they have proper direction, while younger generations may prefer a more collaborative leadership style, working together. The third bullet point, diverse values and priorities. Well, Again, different generations may have different values and priorities. Each of them have their different nuances, such as job security, career progression, social responsibility, or financial gain. These differing values can sometimes lead to disagreements and misunderstandings within the team, and it's important to recognise for the wider workforce to understand and accept these different needs. We also have stereotyping. Now, age-related stereotypes and biases can sometimes arise in a multi-generational team, which can lead to negative attitudes. Discrimination and exclusion is an area that will always need particular focus to ensure all employees accept their co-workers may be different, have different values, but are still an important part of the team dynamics. One of the tricks and challenges here is it's not about just implementing what you can do for the different ages within the workforce. It's making sure that what you implement and how people are engaged understand and buy into it, so they change their behaviors too. And resistance to change. People of different generations may have different attitudes towards change, with some being more open and adaptable than others. This in itself can make it challenging for a company to introduce things like new technologies or processes, or to implement new strategies or initiatives. This is why it's key that communication of what you're planning to do, how, who is involved, and what the expected outcomes are by engaging with your workforce is key. They will be more likely to feel involved and that their voices are being heard if you include them. And the last point on this, in terms of challenges, which was quite a key one, is the management buy-in. I touched on this a little earlier, but I cannot stress how important it is that by gaining management buy-in, you are giving yourself a much better opportunity to succeed. If they understand the real benefits to the organization, they are more than likely to give you their full support. So, what are the practical steps that you can take? If you don't know what your workforce is thinking about, then you're not really going to have a very good starting place to commence. So if you don't already have one, I would say think about creating a focus group. This group should really be restricted to age diversity, and I'll explain why in a minute. So it should be restricted to age diversity only and not be part of another ERG, employee resources group, until such time that this particular focus group has defined what they should be doing. They've set out their terms of reference and agreeing what they want to achieve. Once they have reached the point of reporting this back to the people, their findings, these same people or a nominated few from that group should join the official ERG within the organization if one already exists. Now, the logic behind this approach is to allow the focus group to literally focus only on the topic of age inclusivity and to reach their conclusion. They shouldn't be sidelined or worried about anything else at this stage. That will come when they join the larger group of an ERG. Once they've completed that, they feed that into the wider ERG to ensure that any proposals or recommendations that they have come up with do not introduce issues or conflicts to other diverse group representatives within the organization. Another thing you need to consider for a focus group is it should be made up of different age groups and a mixture of seniority. So what you wouldn't do is have all similar ages, all similar responsibilities within your organization, all managers, all workers. You need to have a mixture. You need to ensure that there's a fair representation of employees that are chosen or volunteer, where all voices are heard and respected, and that this will be adhered to and not allow a hierarchical structure to be created. It's so important that everyone has an opportunity to speak up and say what they think. So it should be an open group where all views are discussed, all concerns are documented, and should allow the group to garner feedback from their teams and peers within the organization. But it doesn't also mean creating a charter of likes and dislikes, but more of one that develops and shapes what things are really important to your workforce, what things are achievable, and understanding the benefits they can bring. If you decide this is an area you need to focus on, agree and appoint a lead from within the organization who will own this program of work and delivery. So apart from the focus group, you have this group of people that are trying to come up with ideas and recommendations. You have to have someone within the organization that has an overarching view and ownership of this program of work. That may be somebody within your diversity inclusion team, if you have one. It may be somebody in HR. Only you can decide who is the right sort of person to do that, but you have to have an owner, otherwise it will go nowhere. And all the recommendations and good work the focus group will put in won't have anyone to report to and try and fight their corner, I suppose is one way of putting it. So again, without buy-in from senior management, yes, I know it's the third time I've mentioned this, but it's so key. Without their buy-in, this is unlikely to get very far. Leadership on such an important topic as this must come from the top, and employees need to see that senior management are 100% behind this initiative. Without that buy-in, it becomes very, very difficult. It's just another thing that's happening within the organization. They have to lead it, they have to believe in it, and they have to support it. So you need to be able to put something together that they can believe in, something that they know will work, not just for the workers, the employees, but also the benefits for the organization. So think very carefully how you can do that, as against saying, we'd like to create this new initiative, and this is what we think it will do. Be very, very specific. And I think you'll be surprised if you can do that, the buy-in that you will get. The other thing to do is to advertise internally. So the wider community within the organization understands that this is happening. Garner their input, ask for their ideas, and most importantly, ensure they feel they are being given the opportunity to contribute somehow. So that may well be, there might be an open forum, a town hall to start this thing off, give them options of how they can contact members of the focus group or the person who's taking responsibility for it. How do they get to see what's going on? The last thing you want to do is create something that the employees feel is being done behind closed doors. If they get that feeling, again, it's something that's not going to work very well. So you have to be very open. If you have an intranet, put it on the intranet. If you've got notice boards, create a few posters, stick them on the notice boards. Just let people know what's going on and let them know how they can get involved or how they can put their views across too. One of the really important processes that does need to be looked at as part of this, you may well set up a great functioning age inclusive environment within your organization. But if you don't at the same time look at your recruitment processes and practices in how you bring on people and the ageist attitudes within that process, that can falter and halt good people coming in through the door. Everyone's not going to stay around forever. There are going to be times when you're going to have to either increase your staff or replace your staff. Retirement will happen. You'll have to bring more people in. But within the recruitment processes and practices, they do play a huge part in, unfortunately, the ageist attitudes, and probably one of the most important aspects to focus on. Now, we know that ageist attitudes play out during recruitment, and often this can be addressed by targeting training. Now, it's often unintentional, and through the correct level of education and training, this can be corrected. But let's face it, if you can't get the people through the door, then over time, all of those skills will be hard to come by. And if you're not being seen as an employer that welcomes a diverse set of ages within your workforce, then people aren't even going to give you a second look when they're looking around for work. Now, I'm personally a great believer in admitting that you don't know what you don't know. It's simple. If you don't know, ask someone who does. By working together and accepting input, you have a far greater chance of success. And finally, Try and treat this as a project. Give it the time and attention it deserves. Don't attempt to make minor adjustments and hope it will just create the desired effect and result. This is always a good start, which will enable you to gain the so important management buy-in that you desperately need. From an organizational perspective, we can talk about the do's and don'ts. We can talk about processes. We can talk about structure. We can talk about budgets. We can talk about a whole host of things. But often I like to think that if people can take a step back and humanize what it is they're doing, particularly in this type of topic, it can make a big difference. So firstly, number one, I've said, have a think about what happens in your workplace now. And do you see any issues we have talked about today? Well, if you think about your own workplace, do you recognize any of the behaviors and issues I've highlighted? Do you think you're already an all-aged inclusive organization? If not, then think about how you go about changing things. And the second point is talk to your colleagues and your friends at work. See if they think this is a topic that needs addressing, or maybe they think it's okay, nothing needs to happen, nothing needs to change. So by doing that, often the little chats by the coffee machine or at your desks, it gives insights to areas that you possibly would not give a second thought to in your work environment, but now maybe it makes sense when you think back to think about some of those conversations and see how they play into your overall thinking. The third one, which is a real important thing for me, is I've always tried to go to my family and understand the sort of things that they're going through, and friends of mine, and it gives you a much more personal understanding of what's going on in the world. So if you try and personalize your thinking by talking to your family and close friends, have any of those come up with examples of ageist attitudes in the workplace or when trying to find a new job? Do you know any of them? Do you, your mother, your father, your brother, your sister, uncle, close friend, whatever? If they have, how can you relate to the impact it has on them? How would you feel if it was you personally in their shoes? So by personalizing these thoughts, it generates a more human empathy element to your thinking and will give you the opportunity to see this through a different lens. The fourth point on this last slide is be honest with yourselves. It's something that we always like to throw out there. There's no accusations. We don't point fingers, but can you relate to any ageist behaviors, even if unintentional? In other words, ask yourself, have I ever portrayed some of the ageist attitudes to others? And think about whether you have or you haven't. Not on purpose, but have you? It may not be purposely done, but by taking a step back and thinking about your own actions, again, this can throw a completely different light onto how you think and act on this topic. Personalize it as much as you can. The fifth point on this last slide is to think about ageist behaviors you've witnessed at work. So have you seen any other people behave in such a way at work? Have you seen how they treat them? If so, then fine, you need to decide what you're going to do. Finally, the last point is, if you belong to a professional organization or have colleagues who work in other companies that are addressing the issue, speak to them. Find out the perspectives from them, what's worked, what hasn't, and often you'll find that this will give you a good head start on how you should approach your skills. And if you want to make change and are struggling, don't be afraid to ask for help or advice or guidance. That's about it from me. And thank you for sticking with me for the 30 minutes. And I hope this presentation, if anything, has given you food for thought. And I look forward to answering any questions you may have. So thank you.
Thank you very much. What you've given us there is a real personal view on this issue in the workplace, which often isn't really talked about, is it?
My previous working life, that's what I used to do. So I treat everything as a project. If you have the right people on board, the benefit long term is far outweighs any spend now. And the spend actually isn't that big. I should probably be careful when I say that. It probably makes people a little bit nervous that we're facing a huge sum of money here. No, they're not, but there will certainly be some spend that's required and time and effort that needs to be put into this to achieve it.
Well, thank you once again, Michael. We really appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, hello and welcome back to Diversity Network's special focus session on why an all-aged workplace is key to the future of work, strategies for an age-inclusive workplace. I'm delighted to introduce our next speaker, Kasim Choudhry, who is President of Future Faces at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Birmingham in the UK. Part of Kasim's job is to prepare and upskill young people for the workplace. He's the Multicultural Apprenticeship Enterprise Ambassador at Pathway Group, which is a national training provider, which amongst other initiatives holds awards for promising young people in the workplace and a festival of apprenticeship. Welcome, Kasim.
Welcome. Thank you so much, Elisabeth, for having me.
Well, let's start with some practical ideas then. Lots of people listening today will be HR managers and DEI leaders thinking about early career strategy. Can you share your best advice for setting up a strategy or initiatives for recruitment, retention and development of younger workers?
Yeah, I think the word diversity, equality, equity and inclusion is an interesting one. And I think I always try and look at the end goal first. I always like to focus on the word equity and inclusion as opposed to diversity. You may not have diversity in your local area where your business is based. And so I tend to, when I go out and speak to organizations about diversity, I often ask them to not focus so much on diversity and not to think about having too many people who are of color or a particular race or religion, because you may not have them in your locality to join your organization. So I think it's important that we focus on the E and the I as opposed to the D, because I think it's important that we look at how does one individual who is different to everyone else in your organization feel when they come to work. And I think that's the most important thing you need to think about. You need to think about that one individual who's maybe a different race to everyone else. How does that person feel included in your organization? And that can happen in a number of different ways, particularly with, understanding them as an individual. Are you as an employer understanding the nuances that they are facing? For example, if someone, if you've got one person who is Muslim, for example, in your organization, and, we've just had Ramadan, we've just had Eid, do you understand what's happening in that person's life during that period? Do you understand what Ramadan is? Do you understand that, that individual's not going to be eating during daylight hours? How does that person feel around their lunch breaks? Are you understanding the fact that that person might be a little bit more tired than usual because they're waking up early in the morning to close their fast? Their, body's generally going to be a little bit weaker because they're not eating as much and they're not consuming as many calories as they normally would do during the working day to keep them going. They may not be drinking coffee. So that, it's about understanding each individual as a person and then working out how you make them feel included in your organization. And there's a whole raft of different ways you can do this. And I could talk about this all day, but I know that's not what I'm here to talk about. But the key message for me when it comes to DEI is about the one. Always focus on how that one individual who may have a difference, it could be a learning difficulty, you may have someone with dyslexia. How are you making their working life better? And that the important thing here is to provide the support, but to also make them feel like they're not being treated differently. So it's about equity. How are you making them feel equitable in the organization? And I think, that there's a fine line between special treatment and putting in the right procedures and processes in place to make them able to do the job that they need to do within your organization. So it's important to be mindful of that also. So coming on to early careers, now we're always looking about the pipeline of our workforce and where is the next generation of leaders within our organization going to come from. And I think the important thing to do when you're starting off an early careers program is to look at your employer brand. Who are you as an employer? What do you stand for? Because that's very, very important now. We've seen over the pandemic that people have left their jobs because they don't believe in their employers. They don't associate with the values of their employers. And as we see this next generation coming through, they hold that more importantly than remuneration. So they're not bothered about what they're getting paid. They want to know how they're going to feel when they come to work. They want to know whether they're going to be accepted. They want to know whether they're going to have the right perks and the right opportunities to progress within your organization. You know, we talked about quiet quitters. Why do people quit quietly? Because they want better opportunities. They want to progress in their careers. I know a lot of quiet quitters, and they are the most successful people I know because they're always looking for that next better opportunity. And if you're not giving those opportunities within your organization, they will go and find them somewhere else. So how does this fit in with early careers? Well, you've got to have a clear strategy. So first of all, what is your employer brand? What do you stand for? What are your key messages to those people who are going to come and join your organization? What are you telling them you're going to do? Are you a sustainable brand? You know, are you a value, you know, do you hold values at the heart of your brand? Very, very important, because the younger generation are seeing this a lot more importantly than other things. You know, before, when you were starting a job, you were like, which is the biggest organization in this sector? I want to go and work for the biggest organization in this sector. All of that has changed. I want to go and work for the most social impact organization because that's what's important to me. I want to go and work for an organization that's delivering social impact. So you've really got to get that messaging about what your organization does and how it supports people, because, you know, people, culture, and management is key now. We're moving away from the old ideas of, you know, workers. There's an old saying from Henry Ford: all I need is a pair of hands. Why do I have to have a body with it? And this is really, really important now, because it's not the hands that matter anymore. It's the person controlling those hands. And it's really important that when you're portraying your employer brand, you're thinking about the person as opposed to the hands that are doing the work. So once you know what your employer brand is, you know what you stand for, it's about getting that message out there. For example, a brand like Coca-Cola. Everyone knows Coca-Cola as a soft drink. But what does it mean to work at Coca-Cola? What does it mean to work at Google? What does it mean to work at EY? You've really got to have the difference between what your consumer brand is, what the brand is that you're putting out to the people, and what your brand is that you're putting out to potential employees. And I think there has to be a certain level of alignment between the two. So your consumer brand has to link in with your employer brand. And a lot of people you'll find who have good employer brands will also have a strong consumer brand, because people will look for that. In recent years, we've seen that a lot of employees, when they start working with an organization, they're told that they're not allowed to post about work on social media, which, you know, we've seen a lot of cases over the past decade with the growth of social media and the impact social media has. It's important that the best people to sell your organization are the people that work in it. You know, there's platforms like Glassdoor. If I want to go and see a strong employer, I will go on Glassdoor and read the reviews. Very much as, you know, if you're going on holiday, the first thing you're going to do is go on TripAdvisor. So it's very important that you build a strong employer brand on platforms like Glassdoor, Indeed, and all of these recruitment websites, because that is what young people are looking at. They're looking at, you know, if they're going to invest their time within an organization, what are they going to get out of it? How are they going to be seen when they go and talk to their friends and say, I work for X organization? You know, that's enough on employer brand. The next thing you've got to do is look at the opportunities. What opportunities have you got in your organization that you'd like to bring young people into? So early careers, think about your strategy and think about the gaps within your workforce which you need to replace. And then think about, you know, what training are you going to deliver? Training is so important. A lot of young people now that are coming out of university, that are coming out of schools and colleges, don't necessarily have the same level of business acumen, employability skills that maybe you would have had. You know, times are changing. It's very unlikely that young people are doing part-time jobs while studying. Again, I'm talking from a perspective of the UK. I know when I was studying at university, even before I went to university, I was working, I was earning money to pay for my studies. However, as people get richer, you know, we grow within our social status within society. A lot of parents are able to afford university fees. They are able to support their children through university without them having to have the need to go and work anywhere. And this is quite important for us to understand, because during the pandemic in the UK, we had the Kickstart scheme, and we had a number of people, young people, who, for them, this was their first job. So you need to understand the culture that you're going to build around your early careers program and how that fits into the needs of those young people. So you've really got to start from the basics, and you've really got to train them about what it's like to work, you know, let alone doing the task. You've really got to build that culture into them from when they start your organization. So you've got to look at the kind of tasks that you're giving them to start off with. And I think it's really important that that there's a healthy balance between the soft approach and the hard approach. I don't think it's wrong to get them stuck in the deep end. But then if you are going to get young people to do difficult tasks, make sure that you've got the support mechanisms in place. So make sure that there is a mentoring scheme. Make sure that there is additional training available to them. You know, you've got senior members within the organization supporting them. So they've got a point of contact. They've got someone that they can speak to, someone that they can relate to, and they can get those extra support throughout their time with your organization. So again, I'm just going to reiterate where we've started from. First of all, in terms of, you know, attracting young people, you've got to have a strong employer brand, and one that talks to them, and one that they can relate to. Second of all, you know, look at the job opportunities. What opportunities are you providing them? And then third, what support are you putting in place for when they join your organization? So it's very important that they're coming in either at graduate level or school leaver level. Do you understand the level of acumen that they've got before joining your organization? And then working with local schools, colleges, community organizations, and understanding what employability skills you need to put in place for them.
There's a lot there, Kasim. I like about the employer branding. That is really important, isn't it? To lots of workers, I suppose, no matter what their age. But I guess the people entering the workplace, as you said, it's often more important how they're going to feel at that organisation than actually how much they'll earn. And I think also something I'm sure you've come across is the importance of being genuine as well about the brand, yeah, and what the company stands for, because people are able to see through organizations which aren't being perhaps walking the walk as well as talking the talk.
Yeah. I mean, I'll give you an example. I started a job at Virgin Money, and the bank was Northern Rock, and they'd been taken over by Richard Branson and rebranded as Virgin Money. And the first thing Richard Branson did was he closed all the executive offices on the top floor and put all of the execs on the ground floor. And he said, and his methodology was that the executives need to be accountable, and they need to be accessible by everyone. You know, putting them on a pedestal and putting them on the top floor of the head office is not setting the right tone. And actually, tone is very important. You know, management need to be accessible. There shouldn't be a hierarchy. Everyone should be part of a team. And if you're looking to build a team, you know, especially a young team, they need to be influenced by the management. And if they're not accessible, if they're not seen, and if they're seen to be better than everyone else, then you're not creating an inclusive environment for the young people coming into your organization.
Yes, I guess it's about respecting, isn't it? Respecting older workers, perhaps, or more senior workers' experience and knowledge, but then also perhaps those older workers, if they're being mentors, as you mentioned, that's really important, isn't it? I guess mentorship can work both ways as well, can't it? For the mentee.
Again, reverse mentorship is a great way to learn to be a better manager and a better leader, because at the end of the day, you need to listen to the people you're leading. And in order to create an inclusive environment, you have to take on board some of the points that you may be missing. And I think that was a key point of, if you're sitting on the 6th floor of your office block, you're not seeing everyone else. You're not seeing the day-to-day. You're not seeing the struggles and the hustle of, the people working in your organization. And actually, Richard Branson's theory of having the execs on the ground floor, they see everyone that walks in. They see the day-to-day running of that business. And actually having that insight and that oversight of what's happening is so crucial to the success of any business.
That's a really interesting example, isn't it? And of course, there's the famous examples of retailers and how top management are encouraged to go on the shop floor. And I guess that's where perhaps, early careers begin, isn't it? And it's probably helpful for management to be reminded of, what it's like to start your job and to have that.
It's important to remember your roots and where you've come from. And I think that's the key message there. As you've talked about retail, any retail manager has always started on the shop floor. And it's always important to know what's happening on the shop floor, because if you can't see the challenges your staff are facing, how are you going to address them correctly? If you're just hearing it from hearsay, oh, this is what's happening, or you're just reading reports all day, you're not actually seeing it firsthand, you can't make the right decisions as a manager. So it's very, very important, for management to be in the thick of things and see what's really happening.
That's right. Well, I guess we've already spoken a little bit about how to support younger workers. Do you have can you share anything about the benefits of this? Why is it important to support younger workers? We obviously have a skill shortage in the UK at the moment, and also sort of great resignation still happening, isn't it? What are the benefits of supporting early careers development?
So again, we talked about retention, we talked about quiet quitting. And if we're going to invest in young people joining our organization, and we talk about the cost of recruitment, how are we going to remain a sustainable business if we can't retain our staff? So, the question around how best can we support young workers and what are the benefits of it, I think we already know the benefits of, supporting our workforce, whether it's young or old. And it is about retention. The costs of recruitment are sky high. Talent, just finding talent alone is difficult. So I think we've when it comes to understanding the benefits, it's not a benefit, it's a commercial decision that you've got to make to sustain your business. So it makes business sense to support your workforce, whether young or old, in the workplace, to make sure that they stay with you. Retaining staff retention is one of the major challenges that every business is facing, whether it's in the UK or anywhere in the world, because if you haven't got staff, you can't run your business. So, what can you do? Again, we talked about mentorship. We talked about employer benefits. We talked about understanding understanding each individual as a person. It's not about the hands, it's about the body behind the hands. And if the body is happy, the hands will work productively. So again, what can you do? It comes back to understanding. And I think every individual will have a different need. And it's about understanding all of the different needs of the people that work with you. And a one-size strategy fits all doesn't work. So you need a strategy that's going to be flexible, adaptable, and can work in different ways with different people. My key message to everyone on this call is, go out and do surveys. Ask the people in your organization what they need, what their needs and wants are, and work out a strategy around that. I can't tell you what an organization in America needs for their staff, because it's very different to the problems we've got in the UK. Now, there may be some similarities, but again, nuance, there's so many different nuances that exist, and you've got to play to your strengths. You've got to look at your workforce. What are they good at? What are they struggling with? If people are struggling with a certain thing, then put some training, put some support in that's going to help them with that. Make them feel like you as an organization care about them. Culture is key. What kind of culture have you got in your organization? Are you a 9-to-5 business, which, you come into work, this is your task and that's it? What are you doing to support people above and beyond? Are you understanding what people are doing outside of work? What matters to them? What are people's social values? What do they hold close to their heart? Because that is what they're going to follow. When you look at, if you're a large organization and a majority of your workforce come from a certain background, are you using your CSR budget to support a cause that people from that background associate themselves with? Are you connecting the dots within your organization?
And specifically talking about different age of workers, I suppose when you were talking about inclusion and the idea of the one, it's important that inclusion policies work for everyone as well, isn't it?
Yeah.
They can be really useful and a good strategy should be applicable to all workers, shouldn't it? Not just one sector.
Exactly. And we talk about reverse diversity. In pockets of the UK, you'll have more ethnic minorities working for an organization than white English people. And I'm sure that's the case in certain parts of America, where you'll have a large proportion of Hispanics working for an organization. And it's about, diversity works both ways. I was at a diversity conference last year where we talked about a male over the age of 45 being a protected characteristic, because actually, he's considered too old for the organization and not included with the younger people in the organization. So I'm seeing a lot of organizations now where a large proportion of their workforce is young, but then how do you mix that in when you've got older people working in that organization? And everyone has to feel included. And this is the key thing, which, when I say the reason why I'm not so focused on the D in DE+I is because it doesn't matter about your diversity. What matters is inclusion and whether everyone feels welcome within that organization. And when you talk about older people, they have their own nuances that they have to deal with. They're parents of children, older children. They've got different problems that they're dealing with within their life. What are you doing to support them?
Well, that's interesting to flip the side, isn't it? Because I know that, you've been to the United States recently and we're surprised at the number of older men and women still in the workplace rather than retired. Let's think about the other end of the career path, about equity for ageism then. What about your approach to inclusion in the workplace for all ages of workers?
Exactly. And I think that's key. I was really surprised to, visited Walmart, visited a number of different places, and it was really interesting to see people from older generation, 50 plus, working still. And it's not something you see much in the UK. I mean, we are starting to see it. But I think
be older than 50 plus as well, wouldn't it? Maybe
yeah,
60.
I'd say probably 60 plus. I mean, I can never tell people's age, and I try not to judge someone on their age.
Nice.
So I go in with, I'm colorblind, age blind. I see people as people, but there's certain things that you will notice, and that's just the way it is. But I think what's interesting is, what are we doing as organizations to support elderly people working in our organizations? Are we supporting them with, for instance, whether they've got medical conditions? What are we doing to support them when they've got to go to doctor's appointments, or even with childcare? I know for me, I mean, both my parents are retired, but they help me with childcare. Now, if they're supporting their children with childcare, what are you doing to support them with extra holidays if they need extra holidays? They're obviously not going to be able to do certain tasks. What are you doing to support them with that? And I think, you don't want to make them feel like they're a burden on the organization either. So it's important, again, when it comes to the E and the I, what are you doing to, there's that fine line between special treatment and reasonable adjustments. And I always talk about reasonable adjustments and the importance of reasonable adjustments in the workplace, whether it comes to, neurodiversity, when you've got someone who's dyslexic or dyspraxic? What are you doing to make those reasonable adjustments to make their work life a better place for them, and for them not to feel like they are, they're always wrong or they're getting things muddled up? How are you supporting them with the right reasonable adjustments in your organization?
And I suppose it's about including all ages as well, isn't it? Adjustments for older workers, and younger workers. It's important to have inclusion policies, isn't it, that suit the individual, but also can be applied to different ages.
I think policies are great, Elisabeth, but I think it's about understanding each individual. It's about understanding the nuances and understanding that one size doesn't fit all.
Well, let's finally close with this then. I know part of your job is to prepare younger people and upskill for the workplace. And I know that you're involved in a festival of apprenticeship. Do you think recruitment of younger workers and in fact early career development paths should actually begin before the workplace? What do you think about schools and being more involved in applied subjects at school, applied subjects perhaps at university or college, and also apprenticeships to prepare younger people better to start work?
So I think the evidence speaks for itself that business need to communicate with education policymakers, because at the end of the day, when you leave school, you're going to go and work in industry. And if what you're learning at school doesn't reflect the needs of industry, this is, we're going to have a skill shortage, and we're going to have an issue where we've got jobs that need to be filled, but we've got people leaving school and college without the skills necessary to fill those jobs. So the communication between industry and education is vital. We need to be moving more towards more vocational teaching in schools, so that when people leave school and college, they are walking into opportunities straight away. And just touching on older generations, what are we doing to reskill people? A lot of jobs have been taken over by technology. So what are we doing to reskill the older generation in doing those jobs? Because, if what I studied computing at school to what people are studying computing at school now are going to be very, very different. Technology has moved on so much. So what are we doing to reskill older people, particularly within tech? So it's key that within organizations, within early careers, training is key, and having opportunities is key. Progression opportunities are really, really important. So I think, just to sum up from today's talk, the key things are, people, culture, and management are key. Know your people, have the right culture, and have the right management practices in place to put the culture in place. So people, culture, and management, very important. Employer brand. Who are you as an employer? How are you promoting your employer brand internally and externally? And how does that link in with your consumer brand, the brand that everyone else is seeing? Retention is all about training, it's about support, and it's about opportunity. If you aren't giving people the right support, the right tools to do the job, they will leave and they will go elsewhere. So very, very important that you look at that. And I think, just coming back to inclusion, understand your people, understand their needs and wants, and be true and genuine to what you're doing. Diversity is not about charts, about how many people you've got from different backgrounds working in your organization. That means nothing if everyone working in your organization does not feel included.
Thank you very much for your time, Kasim Choudhry. You are the President of the Future Faces at the Chamber of Commerce for Greater Birmingham in the UK.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for listening, everyone. Please don't go away. We have a panel discussion now on why it's very important to have multi-generations in the workforce. Thank you very much. Stay with us. Hello and welcome back to Diversity Network's special focus session on why an all-aged workplace is key to the future of work, strategies for an age-inclusive workplace. I'm Elisabeth Galvin, the content editor of Diversity Network, and I hope you've been enjoying what you've learned today. We're very much looking forward to the next session, which is a panel discussion on the topic of inclusion of different ages in the workforce. I'm delighted to introduce our three panellists, Shelia, Callaham, who is the Executive Director of the Age Equality Alliance. Nadia Younes is a DEI executive and coach at Takeda, and Dr. Lauran Star is a DEI psychologist and speaker. Welcome, everyone.
Thank you. Great to be here.
Well, perhaps I'll ask you each just to tell us a little bit more about what you do and how you might contribute to the conversation today. I'll start with Shelia, please.
Well, it's great to be here, Elisabeth. Thanks for the invitation, and nice to be here with such esteemed guests, Lauran and Nadia. So my name is Shelia Callaham. I come from a diversity, equity, and inclusion background, having managed a global diversity effort for a pharmaceutical some years ago. I now focus on age and the way age bias and stereotypes show up across the age spectrum in the workplace, and how that takes away from an inclusive, equitable workplace. And like I said, we talk about age across the age spectrum because it does impact workers at different ages and different stages of their life. So happy to be here.
And what about you, Lauran?
Thank you so much for having me, Elisabeth. And I'm thrilled to be with Shelia and Nadia. So my background, I've been in the DE+I space for about 20 years as a consultant as well as a chief diversity officer. Currently, I head up DE+I for a healthcare company in the state of Massachusetts. And I am a DE+I, in fact, the only one in the United States that is an actual DE+I psychologist for the workplace. When I think about age, it's more stages of life than numbers. And my focus really is the holistic approach to the entire workplace, not just one affinity. So it's how does that stage of life and the intersectionality of other affinities, how do they all come into play? So this is a great topic, very timely, very timely. As we look at the numbers, age is on its way out. Right? The next generation is here. Gen Z is here. So great topic.
And what about you, Nadia? Tell us a bit more about yourself. You're a friend of Diversity Network. You've spoken with us before, so welcome back.
I have. Thank you very much for having me, Elisabeth, and Shelia and Lauran. Great to be here with you as well. So I have led diversity, equity, and inclusion and leadership kind of initiatives in a variety of different sectors and sat in the head diversity role. I'm sitting there now in a global capacity with Takeda for their global portfolio division, and very happy to be at this company that also looks at age across the spectrum. We're actually started talking about Generation Alpha as well, because they are actually starting to enter. We're going back from Gen Z now, starting all over with Alpha again. And we know that there'll be 5 generations in the workplace. And for me, ageism is the one ism we can all aspire to, in a very strange way to say that. If we're lucky enough to live through all of the various life stages, it is the one aspect of ism or discrimination that unfortunately we may experience at any stage in our life. And I think from a workplace standpoint, Lauran mentioned it, we need to look at it at the intersectionality of a number of different dimensions. We cannot look at any dimension of diversity really in isolation of life stage, age, experience, things like this. And I think the workplaces and leaders who are compassionate, caring, understanding, and strategic leaders know that the collective intelligence of an organization cannot leave anyone out, and particularly not in an age where organizations are becoming far more, the change is happening quicker. We can expect change to happen quicker. We have no business as an organization or leaders excluding any experience that comes from workers from across their life age and stages to tackle the tough problems that all of our organizations, regardless of sector, are facing. So that collective intelligence piece, if you leave all the age and stages out of that, it's like dissecting a piece of your brain. Why would you do that?
Mm-hmm. Yes, fair comment. And yes, it's true. Probably ageism is something that is more likely to affect more people, isn't it? Perhaps than some of the other minority groups. So that's an interesting perspective as well. Well, let's talk about older workers to start with. Can you explain what we mean by older workers? What age are we discussing here? And what sort of discrimination is this group likely to face in the workforce? I'll start with you, Nadia, please, this time.
Well, you might have seen me laugh. I don't have a very good poker face, but when people say older worker, I'm like, according to who? In China, we know that women managers retire at age 50. People managers are retiring at age 50. And in data, digital, kind of the technology space, an older worker, depending upon what aspect of data digital you're talking about, may be perceived as older at 35 or 40. And the retirement ages are climbing all over the world with challenges to pension plans and workforce shortages and everything. So when you say older worker, typically there's been kind of a date, and that's set somewhere around whatever the retirement date is in that country or culture. In much of the Western world and some of the Eastern world, that might be 65, 67. But workplaces, realistically, there's the age that they say older worker, 50 plus, 40 plus, whatever age that is that your company or a sector puts on it. But there's also what I call the run rate. And when I'm inside a company, I'm always looking at the demographics of the workforce and all of the different roles. And, what's the run rate to the reinvention age? Because people aren't retiring, they're reinventing themselves. And so how many years do people have before retirement? And maybe they want to reinvent themselves and stay engaged. So I'm giving you a non-answer because I don't think there is an age. I think organizations that are thinking you're an older worker when you hit this age, they're treating it like it's a shelf life, like you're about to expire, like a yogurt or something. And I don't think that's how it's working anymore.
And what about discrimination? Do you think people who have been in the workforce longer than others are facing discrimination?
I think people at all ages can face age discrimination depending upon their sector or whatever, but I definitely think older workers, there's stereotypes around older workers, around not being able to keep up with technology, and they're all stereotypes, and kind of, I think you can debunk most of them. Younger workers not having the right experience, or people saying the younger workers are lazy and entitled, and they cite some examples. I think those stereotypes are generally very harmful to an organization and to individuals. And like any stereotype, you may find behavioral evidence in some people, but it's not in everyone. And you run the risk of really shutting down a lot of great ideas in people and their opportunities to work together to solve problems if you buy into those stereotypes. I think we have to check ourselves on those. But Shelia and Lauran, please.
What do you think, Shelia?
So I think I absolutely agree, but I think as an employees probably perceive mid-40s to be older, and certainly by the time they're in their 50s, they think of that as olders. But like Nadia said, it depends on the industry. Advertising, she mentioned technology, but advertising is another one where, by the time you're in your late 30s, you're not even considered creative anymore. And that's all stereotypical. And it's sad because so much talent is lost by an organization. I have a son who's a senior engineer in a tech company. He just turned 34. And like me, he has salt and pepper hair. And he said to me that he thought that if he were going to be interviewing, that he would consider dyeing his hair, because in the tech space, he's, coming up on mid-30. But it's so important to always be reinventing oneself. And but I think, to your question about how this might show up in the workplace, if you're an older applicant, let's say, then oftentimes your application is not even going to be considered. You're too experienced. I mean, one of the phrases I've heard that absolutely drives me crazy is you're overqualified. That is the biggest bunch of BS I've ever heard. There's no such thing as overqualified. You're either skilled and capable of doing the work, or you're not capable of doing the work. But if you don't have the skill developed, then certainly you need to be considered, well, can that skill be developed? So much these days can be taught, can be learned. And people, I think it's very important for employers and applicants to always be developing their skills and their understanding of technology, understanding what the latest, greatest thing is. How do you write a prompt for Chat GPT, for example? I mean, these are really, really critical skills. I'd love to hear from Lauran.
Yeah, right. I wish we were all in the same room together, because I'd be like high-fiving. Yes, yes, yes. Right, because age is just a number. And I think from a criticality lens, we need to be building organizational cultures that embrace that. So, we bring employees into the workplace, and then they become part of the organization's culture. And if you don't have a foundation in inclusion, doesn't matter what age or what affinity you're bringing into the workplace, they're not going to be heard and accepted. And right now, we are lacking experience. When we look at the numbers in the workplace, we are finding that the older generations, we look at Generation X has the most entrepreneurs of any generation. They're packing up and leaving. That's experience. You're looking at your baby boomers, they're retiring. So that's leaving it now to generation, or your millennials and Generation Z, which will then leave it to Generation Alpha. Are we as an organization embracing inclusion so that the lessons we've learned, the history of the organization is being entrenched into those younger generations? If you're not doing that, then you're already behind the curve when it comes to talent assets and recruitment and attainment. You're behind the eight ball. So it really, I see it from the lens of culture. It is critical that the culture is inclusive and accepts everyone and develops everyone.
And I suppose attracts everyone as well. Shelia said before that older workers are less likely to be shortlisted for interviews and employed and offered training or promoting. So I guess it's
a cultural issue.
Yeah.
Right. Like I have to go back to what Shelia was saying. And if you've got an organization that's not interviewing older candidates, right, if they have an algorithm written that's going to knock that resume out of scope based on years of experience or years in the workforce, shame on that organization. That's right. Unfortunately, is that I always say to, an older person, and what is age, right? Is it 40? I cringed when I think it was Nadia was like 40. I'm like, oh God, I'm wicked old then, because I'm in my mid 50s. I know it doesn't look it. But yeah, right. Like, so I take a step back and is that really a place that you want to work? If they're kicking you out on your resume, if the organization can't see the rich experience. Skills are learnable, experience isn't. And we know, looking at the research, when we look at millennials, they have the least amount of time in the workplace. A lot of them didn't work when they were in college or going to university. So that experience, it's critical that we have that in the workplace. And it's critical that the organization creates that culture that's going to drive and embrace that we have older employees or more experienced employees, showing younger employees or less experienced employees what business acumen looks like, what's appropriate in the workplace. And then we build up those skills. But you can't teach experience. And I have yet to, in my 20 years, stumbled upon an organization that said, yeah, we don't want experience. It's just the opposite.
What about the other side of things then, just to play devil's advocate, organizations say it's too expensive, older employees command a higher salary and actually we can't afford that. What do you say to that, Lauran?
Well, I think then again, that just tells me that your C-suite and your finance department, they have not explored dollars to dollars. They're not getting it financially, right? When an organization says, we just can't afford that, well, you're going to spend that regardless because you're going to need that experience. So you can bring someone on for less, but then you're going to have to train them to get up to speed, to gain some of that experience. You're going to have to double, touch in two buckets where somebody is going to have to help this person move forward because they don't have the experience. When an organization looks at their talent pool, looks at human capital, which is their number one financial draw, when they look at that, they have to recognize that it all comes out in the wash. Right? You hire someone with experience, you gain all of that experience. You shorten learning curves. You are with experienced employees, they're on the ground running from day one. You hire someone with less experience, you're going to have to spend time, which time has dollar signs to it, getting that individual up to speed. So at the end of the day, you really do just break even when you look at experience versus non-experience.
And if I jump in, I might add, sometimes you lose because it's not even breaking even. When I've run the numbers inside companies I've worked with around turnover rates at different ages and levels and the average tenure in roles before people jump. And, we're actually, in many of the companies I've worked with, I've coached leaders to actually have stay interviews, retention interviews for some of their older, more seasoned workers, rolled out things like phased retirement programs, which when those were rolled out in organizations for some of the very senior most people that have expertise that can't be replicated or learned quickly, and you're incentivizing them to stay and transfer their knowledge to the pipeline coming up behind them, because if they just leave and retire or come back as a consultant, you lose that. I mean, a lot of times people are retiring and then companies are hiring back that expertise at consultancy. It's great work if you can get it, like sign me up, right? But it's not a good financial model for companies that are looking for sustainable growth and knowledge transfer. So I think a lot of times, to Lauran's point, it's not only breaking even, you might actually lose money if you don't think and measure things like, the cost of turnover, the cost of retention, the cost of all of the investment. And if you talk to line leaders and people managers that have high turnover in areas that are really hard to find experienced people, they will share with you the pain of having, to constantly be training and retraining people. That impacts customers, patients, whatever your industry, that does impact your business.
My ad would be that people who use the cost of an employee's experience, it's just an excuse. I mean, in most cases, do they even ask the employee, are you, or are they being transparent? Are they sharing the scale of pay, the pay scale? Because I would argue that most employees who apply for a job already have an idea of what the pay scale is because they've done the research and they know. And if they're applying, then they're willing to accept that pay scale. But I do believe that it's important for companies to list their pay scales. That just eliminates all the questions altogether. I will, just to play devil's advocate, argue that experience can be overrated. And I think this hurts people on the early career entry part of the scale. So I have another son who's in college right now, and he says the joke is that they're supposed to graduate college with 10 years of experience. And I mean, it's ridiculous. And so again, this takes me back to the fact that I really like the move towards skills-based, or, the capacity to learn new skills. I think that is very, very important. And so I don't believe that experience is always the trump. I think that it's very important to look at the job, look at what the requirement is and balance, and look at the talent that you have.
And the quality of experience, I think. So we've as D&I practitioners, I think all of us have probably looked at job descriptions that say required X number of years experience. And we come back usually with the DE&I lens of why do you need 15, 20 years experience? You've just eliminated a whole host of
Absolutely.
different demographics. And, somebody with 5 years really rich experience versus someone 20 years experience in the same role who hasn't done much different. Yes, you've got somebody who might be very seasoned, but what's the quality of that experience? I think we tend to challenge that anyway when we're looking at when leaders say, I have to have somebody with this number of years experience. It's like, what's exactly the experience you need? Because there might be a younger worker that actually has it and richer than a seasoned worker that has been doing the same thing.
Well, let's move on then. Oh, sorry, Lauren. Sorry, continue. Sorry.
Oh, I was just going to say, bravo, right on the tip there. As DE&I practitioners, it is all skill focused, and to that experience, I agree with you.
Well, I'll go on to the next question then. What are the foundations for a successful multi-generational workforce then? Perhaps I'll ask Shelia first.
Well, I think the foundations for a successful multi-generational workforce would first and foremost is that you have to understand that age bias and stereotyping is present in the workplace. And it needs to be something that we talk about, like we talk about other lenses that shape our perceptions around other dimensions of diversity. So we need to talk about it. And a great way to talk about it is if you have an employee resource group. There are affinity groups or business resource groups or ERGs, however people name them, for many different dimensions of diversity, but you don't always find them for age. And some companies that have them, maybe they have an early career ERG, or maybe they have a primetime partner ERG, and some may have one that's across the generations. And to me, what's really most important is if you have two, that they're working together, that they're, and I've seen this done very successfully before in organizations where pretty much everything they do is done mutually. Because what would an early career person be talking about that wouldn't be useful to an older person? They're talking about what skills they need to develop in order to, advance to whatever they want to accomplish later. And if you think about what would an older worker be talking about that wouldn't also concern a younger worker? Maybe they're talking about savings or retirement savings. I mean, honestly, retirement is not even a word anymore. But accumulating enough wealth so that when they stop working, then they don't have to worry about living in poverty. Well, that should be a concern for everyone across the age spectrum, because we've talked about this. People are living longer. That means they have to work longer, or they want to work longer. I think Nadia mentioned there's not an expiration date, and people shouldn't be expected to step aside just because they've reached a certain age. So I think about just having open conversations and leveraging employee resource groups to have mutual mentoring and shared conversations, and just helping people understand that really age is something that, I believe Nadia said this as well, that if we're lucky enough to experience it, then that's something that we can be grateful for. And it's something that if we're all talking about and all sharing, then we can all benefit.
Do you agree, Lauren? What's your suggestions for the foundations of a successful multi-generational workforce?
I love what Shelia was saying about the ERGs, and then adding in that mentorship if that employee is ready to be mentored, right? So that we have to take a step back. Is this younger, less experienced employee, are they coachable, or do they need a mentor? Which path do they have to go? And I think the organizations need to recognize that. And then, it is a wonderful means of utilization when we ask our more experienced, who doesn't love to be asked to help someone who doesn't have that experience advance? So we need to be really utilizing that mentorship and that coaching in the workplace, along with the ERGs, along with inclusion, of course.
I suppose it works both ways, doesn't it? Mentoring hopefully helps the mentee and the mentor as well.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think, Nadia? What's your experience at Takeda?
At Takeda, I've really had a lovely experience. In fact, yesterday I was in a half-a-day session with our Ignite Takeda resource group, which is a multi-generational group. So it does some focus on early career, but looks at all of the career stages and brings people together. So they had a leadership summit yesterday with executives and leaders from all. At Takeda, we have kind of a millennial / alpha shadow board kind of council that the executives talk with and run business challenges by to get new perspectives. When we look at DE&I data, we always look at generational or age is one thing we can measure around the world in every country. And so a lot of diversity, we use data to gather insights about what employees really need and want to thrive in the workplace. And so we struggle getting some data around a variety of demographics in different countries, from works councils or reasons or just definitions, all of it. But age and gender are the demographics we can get globally. And even those shift, like gender, we can't ask non-binary everywhere, but we can get the binary gender everywhere. So I think where we can get good data, we use those insights. And I've seen in a lot of organizations, the framing of how you talk about generations and age at work is really important. Like our leaders have kind of called out, and I've heard our leaders call out, let's stop using terms like baby boomers, Gen X, let's just talk about age and stage, career and life, age and stage, which I think is a very good call out. And we're trying to get that very consistently across our company, because those titles, where they come from research and their bell curve and they're handy shortcuts, they're also handy stereotype. They get people to quickly stereotype. So we talk about life and career stages at Takeda. We definitely have heard, and I've heard this in many companies, that if leaders put too much emphasis on one or other generation, you will hear about it in your employee engagement surveys. That there's a reason Gen X is called the forgotten generation, because people are talking about boomers and millennials and alphas. And there's a huge number when you run the demographics in any workplace. There's actually quite a large number of people still in the leadership pipeline or coming into the workplace, re-entering the workplace, or wanting to have a long kind of run rate to career that are in this category of, and here I am using the category Gen X, but that are in this age range. So I think companies that are doing it right or getting better at doing it are getting rid of the nomenclature that reinforces stereotypes, or when they use it, clarifying that we're really more interested in your skill in life and career stage. I use the example of rolling out a phased retirement program because when I helped a company do that, it was very quickly that younger workers and people of all ages and stages said, I'd like to phase. I can think of reasons in my life where I might want to phase in and out of the workplace. COVID shifted the workplace irrevocably. That genie is out of the bottle. For decades, people wanted to work more flexibly, and leaders kind of begrudgingly let people work from home, maybe 1 day a week, 2 days a week. And yesterday in our conversations with the multi-general workforce, we did talk about this is a bit of a limited conversation to talk about how many days in the office versus how many, like the workplace has changed. And at every life stage, people want more control over where, when, and how they work. And the companies that are able to provide that and understand that life stages play a role in that will get their share of the best talent from every single age group.
Well, it was interesting you were saying about the shadow board. That's something I've not heard before, actually. And I'll pick up actually on the stats and the measurement and metrics a bit later. But I wanted to talk a bit about the stages of working life and how they're changing. What used to be a linear progression up the chain is now more of a horizontal, career shift with longer working lifespans and breaks for periods of life experience, such as traveling and then family responsibilities as well. So how can companies reimagine the traditional career path? Perhaps I'll ask Lauran this one first.
Sure. Again, we take this holistic approach, looking at the employee as an employee first and foremost, right? You remove all those filters and then look at what their growth plan looks like within the organization. So we need to do that first and foremost. And then from there, allow what's being brought to the table to thrive and flourish.
What do you think? Let's ask Shelia this next question.
Well, I think for leaders, I think it's really crucial for them to understand the shifting of age demographics and how that could impact their business. So, for example, according to the United Nations, centenarians are the fastest growing demographic group of the world's population. So you have to ask yourself, okay, what does it mean if people are living to 100? How does that impact the workplace? Well, as we've already talked about, people who are living longer, healthier lives need and want to work longer to support this continued longevity. And so as a result, the workforce is experiencing what I perceive anyway to be increasing pressure to change. And instead of a retire by 60 ideology, there's this idea of a 60 to 80 year career. And that requires the ability to step off and to come back on, and step off and to come back on, so that we, can maintain the strength, the emotional, mental, physical strength in order to live a healthy, long life. So, but with all that, you have to think about the fact that current data shows that 78% of older workers have seen or experienced age discrimination in the workplace. And that's the highest level it's been since AARP began doing these measurements 20 years ago. So, not only does that hurt older people, and it hurts the businesses because they're losing out on that talent potential. But think about this. When younger people see older people being passed over, pushed aside, what kind of picture does that paint for their future? So, the bottom line is that successful businesses, they need talent, and fewer births, people living longer in the U.S. anyway, less worker immigration. There is a need to really expand the parameters when organizations look at talent. And I just want to take just a minute to flip it and think about, from the employee perspective. We have a member of our board, Marty Constant, and she is a career futurist. And she coined the term career agility. And she suggests that employees think of their current jobs as a project. And when you're doing a project, there's a natural beginning, and then there's a natural end. And as an employee, if you do not believe that your current employer cares about your welfare, if they're not going to develop you, then you need to be proactive enough to decide, okay, what kind of skills do I need in order to move to whatever project I want to tackle next. So that's just an idea from both sides, the employee and employer.
I mean, it is really exciting, isn't it? I am envious of all your jobs because you are in such a position of power, aren't you? I think Nadia's right. COVID has completely changed the way we approach work, and now HR managers and DEI leaders really are at the forefront, aren't they, for shaping the future of work? And it must be really hard to keep up, actually, with everything changing all the time. But it was interesting, Shelia, that you were saying about this different career path now, and by employees being able to have more control over how they work and when they work and how they choose to do that, perhaps it will give people a much longer career. They will have the physical and mental strength to have a much longer career. So that will be really interesting as well to think about. Perhaps I'll ask Nadia the question then about this slightly different career path now that we're facing. It used to be a linear progression, didn't it, upward, but now it's more of a horizontal career shift. So how can companies reimagine this traditional career path?
Yeah, and I think their employees will help them reimagine it, particularly employees as they age who want to do different things. Like I think we often guide people earlier in their careers about all the different types of experiences they should get to be able to move around the organization, whether it's laterally or up or to all the different experiences they should get. What I find with mid-career to older workers is that we kind of know the experiences we've had and the ones we'd still like to get. And so I think we may be able to be in a really good position to have those open conversations with our managers if they're open to it. And this is why so many organizations are trying to become learning organizations. They keep talking about wanting to become learning organizations to instill this ongoing learning and development. If you're not always learning and developing, then you're actually not continuing to develop your most important kind of aspect of your business, which is your people. So how do you continue to develop the people from the inside and bring in new talent and idea from that? What's the right balance, right? Why I often coach leaders to think about their teams very consciously in terms of the diversity. What's the business problems they're trying to tackle, and what are the complementary skills and abilities that they need to bring in to solve those problems? And sometimes there's some demographic complementariness, and sometimes there's skill set complementary versus fit. Because I think the older mindset around hiring has been, I want to hire somebody that fits our culture, fits our team, fits our, I'm currently working in a pharmaceutical company, but I've worked in finance, I've worked in academia, I've worked in mining, I've worked in a number of different industries and sectors. The company I'm currently working with valued that. But I've also interviewed for companies like, you didn't spend your whole life growing up in this industry. Yep. And it's like, you should be thankful I didn't. Like, honestly. So when I met Takeda and I learned about who they were, and I loved the fact that they actually got that, bringing that complementary skill set. There's enough people in pharmaceutical that have grown up in pharmaceutical. Mm-hmm. And same with finance or any of the other places I've worked. There's enough people in those industries that have grown up in those industries, and there's value to that. I don't discount that value. But what's the complementary mix of skills and experience that you're looking for to drive, the ongoing sustainable changes that an organization needs? And those come at a cross section of generations and experiences and industries and skill sets. So I think Takeda and other companies that are really fostering a learning culture and getting that, you have to bring in the mix to be successful, to keep up. And the other thing I'll say about Takeda, it's a 240 plus year old company that is a Japanese based company. And what I really have loved about my experience with them so far is that this is really a company that doesn't think quarter to quarter. So that there is something in it for long-term planning. They are looking ahead at wanting to, how do we stay relevant for the next 240 years? And they also know that means we have to stay very competitive in the talent market. And you can't stay very competitive in the talent market if you're not keeping up with demographics. And as Shelia was saying, there are a lot more blue zones in the world, lots of people living to 100, working longer, needing or wanting to work longer. We invent younger workers that want to step in and out, caregivers that are sandwich generation. I mean, employees will force the workplace to change over time. The best companies will proactively change and get the pick of the talent. The companies that lag behind and wait till they absolutely have to change, they will have lost out on the best talent that is already choosing where they want to go, what culture they want to work in.
Well, speaking about being proactive, we've talked a lot today about skills, haven't we? So I wanted to ask about soft skills training, which could help develop a multi-generational workforce, such as the ability to collaborate, work in groups, manage information overloads, respond adaptively. Perhaps it's worth discussing that for a little bit. Maybe I'll ask Shelia first.
I think in developing soft skills, I think there are people across the age spectrum who can benefit from sharpening their soft skills. And I think that role playing is actually a very good way to do it. And if you're thinking about, even if you were thinking about responding to age-related comments, for example, or any dimension of diversity comments that might be considered inappropriate, and you want people to learn how to, for example, help hold themselves or a colleague accountable, then role play, I think, is a really valuable way to do that.
Interesting. Have you tried role play through your work, Lauran?
Right. I'm going to be honest. As soon as Sheila said role play, I kind of cringed a little bit. It is one of the best tools out there to but I hate doing it. But I always learn from it. So I agree with you 100%. It's allowing your employees to become uncomfortable to build skills. Which we have to remind them of that. Like, it's okay to be uncomfortable in this process. This is how you're going to grow. When we look at a skills base, I fall naturally back to emotional intelligence, that self-awareness, and that like self-awareness regardless of your age, because we see that full pendulum swing with self-awareness where we might not have enough of it or we have way too much of it and we don't care. Communication is another gap area we are seeing, where we have a very technologically advanced workplace where some get it and some don't, and some just assume text messages rather than actually clicking on Zoom and having a Zoom phone call, right? Because we're no longer using the telephone. Let's be honest, like the telephone's gone at this point. So, right, it's that communication, how to write an email appropriately. Those softer skills. Influence, I think, is getting lost. How are we influencing? How do we get the more experienced employees to show the less experienced employees how to collaborate and how to build that influence among that collaboration, or even networking, right? We never want to see that siloing, especially with Zoom, with this hybrid workplace. We want to make sure our employees are actively reaching out and embracing other employees that will help drive their own development. So, it really, and I think it's important to mention that it's not just the organization's responsibility to develop oneself. Right? Employees have to have skin in the game. They have to want to develop. And I like to think, I haven't seen the exact numbers, but I like to think, when we look at the less experienced employees coming into the workplace, they have functioned on a team at some point, and they have that desire to develop. I think we need to be measuring learning agility and the ability to advance and have ownership of those skill sets. And I don't know, this isn't I remember back in the 90s, right? It was I worked for Johnson & Johnson, and they were all about developing every employee. Every employee had a development plan. And we've taken a step back from that, I think, business-wise, culture-wise. And there are gaps now that we're seeing. To Takeda, y'all do a wonderful job with succession planning. Probably one of the best succession planning models I've ever seen. And right, they do succession planning with every employee, not just the young and up and coming. So, right, that's part of their development. Kudos. Very nice. So I think
have career conversations.
Yes, those career conversations. And what do you want to do next? Are you happy where you're at? Do you want to advance? Do you want to try something new? We need to be having those everywhere, not just at bigger firms.
What do you think, Nadia, about soft skills training? Is that a priority, or is that?
Well, first, let me say I love hearing the external perspective that we're excellent at succession planning. I'm going to go back and tell all my HR colleagues that's what I heard, and they will probably laugh and go, "Wow, we're working so hard to get better at it." across the organization, but we really do talk a lot to our employees about owning their own development, as well as helping them develop. So it's both ways, right? There is the coaching, mentoring, sponsoring stuff we put in place, and the employees owning their own career that meet in the middle. Soft skills. That term has always perplexed me because they are hard. They are hard skills, and they're getting harder. So when we call it a soft skill, it's almost like we give it this diminutive presence. And we need leader. I don't think it's a generational thing either. Like I know plenty of people that would fall into the latter parts of their career that have not mastered these hard skills of soft skills, and plenty of younger people that kind of are much better at it. So the other piece that is in this mix is companies are so connected now across cultures. Even if you only work in one country, and what your supply chain, your employees, your customers, your business partners, we are global. We are global organizations. I don't know, unless you're a small business, or even then your products and supplies may be, but in all the companies that I've been working for in the last decade or so, that global connectivity requires, a lot of companies, including Takeda, are talking about the need for agility, and employees are saying we're not agile enough. We got to be more agile. And so people are putting in agile methodologies and looking at data and digital and trying to go agile. And I keep raising my hand going, there's this cultural agility piece, which touches at these hard skills of understanding in the cultural context. I know, for instance, that certain countries and cultures, if I have 50 people on a team meeting, they may or may not use the chat. And so we have other vehicles that there are other communication methods that we might use to engage audiences in Asia versus LATAM versus where English isn't the second language or third or fourth language, or we have to adapt our skill sets around communication to know our audience. And our audience is really culturally very mixed. So, if you have an English only workplace, that may or may not, English might be the language that you use, but when you're working in cross-country teams, you may need to find ways to get feedback. That you have to build a cultural agility to really listen.
And it's certainly really important with the hybrid and working from home, isn't it? Reliant on technology, picking up those cues on digital meetings and things like that. There's so much to say, isn't there, to answer each question? I nearly have run out of time, but I'd love to just briefly talk about how can we measure success for multi-generation inclusion. As you said, Nadia, it's actually gender and age are the two aspects of diversity and inclusion you absolutely can measure, can't you, in terms of sort of participation and retention and things. But what about success? How can we measure success?
I think demographics are really important. And what I see is oftentimes employers are tracking demographics for gender or, race and ethnicity, but they're not thinking about age. And so I think it's really important that across all these dimensions of diversity, who is your employee, what is your town, what does your employee base look like? Where are there gaps? Where could you be stronger? And I think looking at turnover rates, where are you losing talent? At what ages are you losing talent? At what, you always want to know where the leaks are in the organization and kind of drill down and figure out what is it? Is it a cultural thing? Is there something that we need to fix? I think that HR, you look at your employee complaints. What are people talking about? What are the former water cooler? What are people chatting about? I think that's really important. I think one of the best ways to measure is by employee surveys and being consistent with your employee surveys. at least annually, and then depending on where there might be problem areas to maybe do pulse surveys and until you start to see change. The thing that I always loved about surveys when I worked in DEI is because it just made strategy planning so easy, because you look at where you need to where the opportunities are to be stronger in a certain area. And then you create your strategy from that, and then you measure are you getting better? Are you getting worse? What do you need to do? I think that exit surveys are really important too. Do you have people leaving? Why are they leaving? There are lots of ways that you can measure success. And but I look forward to hearing, what Lauran and Nadia say as well.
What do you think, Lauran?
Definitely looking at that retention and employee engagement surveys and shaking out those employee engagement surveys by age, by generation, so that you're seeing who's staying, as Shelia had mentioned, who's staying, who's leaving, what are their thoughts, how do they feel, what's the engagement level look like, what's the development level look like. There are a lot of different ways you can measure success. And there's a great way to measure failure, and that's turnover. Right? If you're losing your experienced employees, there's something going on. There's an issue that needs to be addressed. So, I think this is a fairly simple question in that sense. I don't have a whole lot to add other than that's how we do it.
And what about you, Nadia? Final thoughts on the topic of measuring and metrics?
I think, and I'm not going to discount employee opinion surveys and things like that. I want to be a bit provocative here because I think companies rely too heavily on them. They are employee perceptions, and you absolutely need to listen to employees and get that qualitative feedback, and you need to pair it with quantitative feedback. Mm-hmm. Companies pull teams together around the things that are most important to their organization. Who's on those teams? Who's getting the development opportunity to be on those teams? Who has access to the executives? Who are the executives going to for information and ideas to solve their sticky business challenges, and how diverse are those groups? Who's in the succession plans that are always the bridesmaid, never the bride, or groomsman and never the groom, because they sit on the same succession plan, but they never actually get picked to be promoted. I think you can trust what your employees are saying, but then you need to verify it with the actual evidence of what's actually happening in the workplace. So both are important. You need lead and lag indicators. You need to do some projections on things. But when teams are being formed to tackle challenges, a lot of times it's looked at in the rearview mirror and it's too late. So it's like, we don't have enough diversity now. And next year, maybe we'll get better. Or 5 years from now, we'll reach our 50-50 goal or whatever the goal is. And I really think looking at the makeup of the teams that are most visible, solving the hardest business challenges, have access to leaders, where are we going for talent, that kind of thing, are also really key measures that get the attention of leaders, even more than turnover rate. The leaders that are feeling the turnover, they get it and they're already on board. But if you're a leader and you don't have a high turnover rate, you're not really focused on someone else's turnover. So I think it's a combination of qualitative and quantitative, lead and lag, and really painting a picture of what's the impact to the organization when you don't integrate diverse generations and a multitude of diversity into how you're solving your business problems.
And, to tag on to that, I think we need to recognize that how you measure, how you equate what success is unique to the organization. Not all organizations have the ability to have all that information readily available. Not all organizations, are global. I typically work in midsize. I'm in that 5,000 employee range, and I'm very, very happy there, and have no plans on going up, because that's my sweet spot. And I think there are a lot of organizations out there that we just need to recognize. And I don't want anyone that's tuning in today going, oh, well, we don't have those resources. It really starts with one person and having those conversations to get the juices, flowing in the brain, so that there can be an impact, right? And intent versus impact. We want to have that. That final outcome is that impact and how it's perceived, regardless of the size of the organization. So if you don't have those resources, it's okay. Don't panic. Don't throw the bathwater away with the baby here. Take a deep breath and say, well, what do we have for resources? How big is our organization? What is that impact going to look like? We may not have, this amazing, I'll throw it back at you, right? I just love your succession planning. It's just amazing. But I've never worked for an organization that has all of those assets readily available, or the money to put into those assets. And that's okay. You have to utilize what you have. You have to, right? Every organizational culture is unique to that organization. So how are you utilizing your experience? That's the big question, right? When I talk to organizations, how are you utilizing your experience? Are you utilizing your experience? And then how are you measuring those outcomes? Because it will be different from company to company.
Any final thoughts, Shelia?
I suppose my final thought, since we are talking about age and quote, the older worker, I would say if you work in a company, or if you're a recruiter or a hiring manager, and you have this notion that there is a sweet spot between 25 and 40, if you're looking to hire or promote, then I would suggest that you challenge that notion. Because if you think about this perceived sweet spot, we're talking about a 15-year window of talent. But if you could expand that sweet spot to say 20 to, I don't know, let's just say 90, then what do you have? What do you have? A lot more to choose from.
That's a very inspirational place to finish. So we'll have to wrap it up there. But thank you all so very much for joining us. Lauran, Shelia and Nadia, you've all answered the questions really differently and from different perspectives. And I've learned a lot from the conversation. I know that everyone listening today will have done as well. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.